That night, Maite's dream was so vivid it blurred with reality. She walked through a ruined city she both recognized and didn't, with buildings, some clearly Mayan, others of an indecipherable architecture, rising under an impossibly blue sky. Most disturbing, nothing cast a shadow. Every object, structure, and person she saw was bathed in a soft, omnipresent light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. Upon waking with a start, Maida turned on her bedside lamp. The digital clock read 3:27 a.m. She automatically grabbed her notebook, as she always did after significant dreams. On the open page, written in her own handwriting, but with no memory of doing so, was a word, Uxmal, and below it, a sequence of symbols identical to those on the sphere. 2 days later, Maite and Ignacio landed in Merida once more. The flight passed in tense silence, interrupted only by Ignacio's increasingly frequent episodes of muttering incoherent phrases, like fragments of future conversations. The sphere, carefully packed, traveled in Maite's backpack, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it emitted a subtle vibration only she could perceive. The rented car moved along the road to Uxmal, one of the most significant archaeological complexes of Mayan culture, but far less visited than Chichen Itza. Maite drove while Ignacio, beside her, consulted hastily translated ancient documents. There are scattered references in colonial texts to Uxmal as the city without sun, he explained, his voice hoarser than usual. The Spanish interpreted it as a reference to dense vegetation. But now, my dream, Maite completed, a city without shadows. Dusk was falling as they reached the archaeological site. They had coordinated with a security guard, a former student of Ignacio's, to access it after tourist hours. In the growing twilight, the complex took on an eerie quality. The monumental buildings cast impossibly long shadows that seemed to move autonomously. Following the document's directions, they headed to the least restored section of the site. There, away from tourist routes, stood a small square building archaeologists had catalogued as a minor administrative structure. Here, Ignacio indicated, shining his flashlight on nearly imperceptible glyphs carved at the building's base. They're identical to those in the tunnel under Kukulkan. Maite meticulously photographed each inscription. The similarity was undeniable. The same hybrid code, the same impossible blend of ancient Mayan symbolism and patterns suggesting advanced mathematical knowledge. They circled the building until they found what they were looking for, a deactivated altar, partially hidden by vegetation. According to Project Eclipse documents, this altar had been intentionally ignored during official restorations. With basic tools, they carefully removed the compacted surface layer of earth. What they found beneath defied all logic, a perfect circle of carved stones with repetitive symbols. Each symbol seemed to represent a date, and among them, they recognized the current month. Then, a discovery that chilled Maite's blood, her own name, written with phonetic precision in adapted Mayan glyphs. "This is impossible," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "These stones are centuries old." Her trembling hand instinctively reached for the symbol representing her name. When she touched it, an electric shock coursed through her body, and for a fleeting moment, she heard her own voice saying words she hadn't yet spoken. "We're trapped in a loop we never created." As Maite recovered from the shock, Ignacio had found something else, a hidden compartment beneath the altar. Illuminating it revealed a partially destroyed statuette. The clearly Mayan figure depicted a human with impossibly precise features, arms in a scribe's position, and eyes, unsettling, empty cavities, carved with disturbing realism, as if the artist meant to depict a gaze that saw beyond the visible. The statuette held a small stone tablet inscribed with a phrase Ignacio translated in a broken voice. "We are the mistake you forgot." They abandoned the site as night fully set in. The silence between them was no longer one of focus, but of pure fear, the primal terror that arises when fundamental certainties crumble. At the modest hotel in a nearby town, the receptionist handed them an envelope someone had left that afternoon. It had no sender. In their room, with curtains drawn and the door locked, Maite opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were black and white photographs faded by time. The images showed a little girl next to an ancient wall, where a symbol identical to Uxmal's central circle was clearly carved. The girl was Maite, and according to the date printed on the edge, 1990, the photo had been taken 3 years before her birth.
Mexico City greeted them with cold, relentless rain that turned the streets into murky rivers. Maite watched the droplets slide down the taxi window, forming patterns that reminded her of the sphere's inscriptions. 3 days had passed since Uxmal, and the impossible photograph remained tucked between her notebook's pages like an open wound in logic. Ignacio, beside her, showed increasingly evident signs of mental disintegration. His notebooks, once models of academic precision, now contained entire pages of symbols he swore he hadn't written. "It's not me drawing them," he confessed that morning, his voice breaking. "It's like my hand has its own memory." In the small apartment serving as their temporary base, Maite laid out all the gathered information. The study wall had become a mosaic of photos, notes, diagrams, and maps, connected by colored threads, a setup that looked more like the work of an obsessive conspiracist than a respected archaeologist. "We need full access to Project Eclipse," Maite decided. "We can't settle for fragments anymore." The autonomous university maintained old servers that were rarely updated. A contact in the systems department had provided temporary credentials for remote access. It wasn't strictly legal, but the line between ethical and necessary had blurred long ago. Past midnight, as the rain pounded the windows with renewed fury, Maite breached the historical archives. Most were encrypted or damaged, but one remained intact, the foundational document of Project Eclipse, dated 1970. As the pages appeared on her screen, Maite's breathing grew shallow. It wasn't a conventional archaeological dig. The project's stated goal was as absurd as it was disturbing: to explore the quantum properties of pre-Cartesian artifacts and their potential for manipulating nonlinear temporal sequences. The original team included archaeologists, physicists, theorists, linguists specializing in symbolic mathematics, and surprisingly, experts in advanced optics. The central premise was as bold as it was heretical. Certain patterns in Mayan architecture and symbolism acted as cognitive catalysts, capable of altering the observer's temporal perception. The project had conducted experiments to determine if specific symbols and light frequencies, when carved into stones according to astronomical patterns, could produce measurable temporal anomalies. Technical notes described how test subjects experienced bidirectional mnemonic leaks, memories that hadn't yet happened, but something had gone catastrophically wrong. The final reports were cryptic. Several researchers suffered neurological collapses. 2 deaths were officially attributed to natural causes. The project was abruptly canceled, and most disturbingly, a unanimous decision was made to contain the findings through physical burial at Ground Zero, the tunnel. They had buried the data in the tunnel beneath Kukulkan. Maite slammed her laptop shut when she heard a noise in the living room. Ignacio stood by the window, staring at the flooded street. His rigid posture was unnatural. "I just remembered something," he said without turning. "I was there." "Where?" "In Project Eclipse," he replied in a monotone. "I was one of the linguists. I was young, just a graduate student. They promised we were making history. They never mentioned we were breaking it." Maite felt the ground dissolve beneath her. "Ignacio, that's impossible. The project ended over 50 years ago." He turned slowly, his face illuminated by intermittent lightning, looking like a fragmented mask. "I recognized the sphere's symbol in Ex-Boca because I carved it, Maite. I was part of the team that coded the first hybrid glyphs." His voice took on a tortured confessional tone. "We wanted to communicate with the past, create a linguistic bridge that transcended time. But instead of sending messages backward, we opened a door, and something began to leak in both directions." He approached the wall where Maite had organized their research. With a trembling hand, he pointed to the photo of the child Maite next to the carved symbol. "And the most terrifying part is that I remember you, Maite. I remember you from before. I remember you as a child in Ichul, even though that happened decades before you were born, or decades after I was there. I don't know anymore." Returning to Chichen Itza felt as inevitable as it was irrational. Maite knew this as she prepared the basic equipment they'd bring: flashlights, cameras, archaeological tools, water. The sphere, wrapped in layers of cloth, rested at the bottom of her backpack like a pulsing secret. Ignacio barely spoke. His moments of lucidity had become sporadic, like islands of consciousness in a sea of temporal confusion. At times, he looked at Maite and spoke as if she were someone else, or as if they were in another moment. His notes had turned cryptic, blending advanced mathematics with Mayan linguistics in patterns that defied comprehension. The journey was made under the guise of a fake academic invitation. The advantage: no one would question their presence at the archaeological zone. The disadvantage: they'd be under constant surveillance. The night before their planned excursion, Maite received an anonymous text message on her phone, precise coordinates and a time, accompanied by a cryptic signature: E6. At midnight, while the guards made their usual rounds around the outer perimeter, Maite and Ignacio slipped toward the coordinates location, a lesser-known section of the northern wall, partially hidden by uncontrolled vegetation. There, among the shadows, a slender figure awaited. "I'm E6, the woman said in an unplaceable accent. "We don't have time for formal introductions." Without further explanation, she led them through a hidden passage between the stones of the wall. The narrow tunnel descended in a spiral. It clearly wasn't part of the original Mayan structure, but had been recently excavated with near-surgical precision. "This access was created in 1974, E6 explained as they moved forward. "Officially, it doesn't exist, nor does the document you're seeking,"